Good morning, everybody. Welcome to BDO's webinar, the first in our Frankly Speaking series of webinars, where we hope to be able to provide you with clarity on 3 issues that we know our clients are currently facing. Of course, there are many others during this time of COVID, and we'll be hosting another webinar at which we will be addressing some of these other topics. My name is Ashley Truscott. I am the head of marketing at BDO, and I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by some of my colleagues who will be presenting their thoughts and insights. Unfortunately, our office managing partner for Johannesburg, Bert Lopes, who was going to attend and host this webinar, has a power failure in his area, so he is not able to host, so I have stepped in for him. Before we continue, just to make sure that I am not speaking into the ether, could someone please type in the Q&A section that you can hear me? Okay, I've had confirmation that I am being heard, so I'll carry on. Thank you. So for those of you who are new to BDO, just a very brief introduction. We're the fastest growing professional services firm globally and have been for the last 10 years. And we provide a broad range of audit, tax and advisory service offerings, from risk advisory and people solutions to accounting for small businesses and cybersecurity. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in this time of COVID, and it does present an opportunity for us to help our clients with some of their immediate needs. For this particular webinar, we're covering some people issues, we're looking at some cybersecurity issues, and of course, unfortunately, some businesses face the very real threat of failure, and so we will be addressing that as well. We hope that we'll be able to provide you with some of the information that you need and be able to answer some of your questions. And you are able to contact us directly after the webinar as well. We will provide contact details at the end of the webinar. So just some housekeeping issues. If you could make sure that your video function is off, that you remain on mute at all times, just to prevent distractions for the other delegates from background noise. We have a Q&A function as part of the webinar, so you are able to ask questions at the end of the presentations via the Q&A function. And as I said earlier, we'll provide an email address for those of you who want to get hold of us directly afterwards. Our speakers today come from across our advisory division. Hans Klopper is the director and head of our business restructuring division. He is an admitted attorney specializing in restructuring and insolvency law. Dr. Teresa Kruger is a consulting organizational psychologist in our BDO People and Business Solutions division. Sadika Maharaj and Michiel Jonker work in our advisory services division. So I'm going to hand over to Hans Klopper from our business restructuring division to take you through his presentation.
Good morning, everybody. On 20 March 2020, shortly after the first address by our president on COVID-19, I came across the following quote of the New York Times columnist Tom Friedman. He said, we need to manage the unavoidable so that we can avoid the unmanageable. Now that quote resonates heavily with me, and I find it equally applicable in relation to financial health. Like many humans treat their health, likewise in business, the first signs of financial illness are almost always ignored, and management invariably waits for the problem to go away instead of taking the necessary medicine early. This then leads to more financial hardship and in most cases cause companies to go into liquidation with a very difficult prospect of restructuring its affairs. So on the screen, you'll see the slide as to what financially distressed means from a legal point of view. The term business rescue describes the purpose and aims of corporate restructure procedure included under Chapter 6 of the Companies Act, and is also used as a noun to describe the proceedings encapsulated in Chapter 6 as a whole. The term financially distressed as defined in the Companies Act appears on your screen, as I said, and it means that when it appears to be reasonably unlikely that the company will be able to pay all its debts as they become due and payable within the immediately ensuing 6 months, or it appears to be reasonably likely that the company will become insolvent within the immediately ensuing 6 months. Now, many businesses are already in that space. However, the Companies Act contains the medicine, if one can use that word, available to businesses, showing the first signs of distress, and is flexible and presents opportunities for not only restructuring professionals, but also to investors who wish to invest in potentially distressed situations at a lucrative return. So Section 129(7), and I just need to add at this stage that there is a lag in the slides coming through, so it'll come through shortly. Directors need to be mindful that a failure to take the necessary action when the first signs of distress appear may lead to personal liability. Now, this is provided for in Section 129(7) of the Act. While it is so that entrepreneurs do not readily concede that they may have financial problems, it will be foolish not to seek official help when the first signs of financial illness appear. When positive cash flow is still available and potential shareholder assistance is still possible, the chances of a successful restructuring of the business showing such early signs of distress are much greater, and all that it requires is to seek early professional assistance. Business rescue proceedings can be initiated on a voluntary basis and also on a compulsory basis by way of an application to court. And there are only two requirements to be satisfied for a board to voluntarily commence business rescue proceedings. One is that the company is financially distressed, and two, that there appears to be a reasonable prospect of rescuing the company. The board of directors of a company may accordingly commence proceedings, but they must always act in good faith. Bad faith will be demonstrated when the intention of the directors in passing the resolution is a clear beat. So on the early signs of financial distress, we have multiple layers of services available within BDO to restructure such potential distressed financial affairs. We have advice on business restructuring, the restructuring of employment contracts, a thorough look at businesses' tax affairs, advice on corporate finance, and the ability to investigate with a forensic team in place. Most importantly, where directors take proactive steps to engage with its creditors, being its business's most affected stakeholders during times of distress, they may find that there will be a better outcome. Now, the next slide refers to Section 22 of the Companies Act, which is significant. It should be noted that this section commences with the recordal that a company must not carry on its business recklessly, with gross negligence, and with the intent to defraud any person for any fraudulent purpose. But in the second section, it states that where the Commission or CIPC has reasonable grounds to believe that a company is engaging in conduct prohibited by subsection 1 or is unable to pay its debts as they become due and payable in the normal course of business, the Commission may issue a notice to a company to show cause, as it sets out on the screen there. Now, subsection 3 provides that a company to whom such a notice has been issued in terms of subsection 2, who fails within 20 business days to satisfy the Commission, may cause the Commission to issue a compliance notice to the company requiring it to cease carrying on business or trading, as the case may be. So at a first glance, it appears that this section only relates to reckless and fraudulent trading, but the sting is in subsection 2 of section 22. It is in this respect where directors need to be very mindful and should communicate openly and honestly with creditors. The legislator has unfortunately created a potential monster for companies in financial trouble by virtue of section 22. Now, let's have a look at a notice that CIPC issued on the 24th of March, and I've got an extract of that on the screen. The question that arises here is that the general extension provided is that companies that are already under business rescue seem to have a, in inverted commas, break until 30 April to do what needs to be done in the process. What is, however, significant is that CIPC has notified us that during lockdown and until 16 April, DA's non-applies and one cannot do any BR filings. Now, the question is whether the Disaster Act trumps the Companies Act, and that is debatable and hopefully will be a moot issue in a week from now. This does not only apply in steps in relation to the Commission, such as the filing of notices and reports, but it means that it does not prevent business rescue practitioners to move the process forward with the consent of stakeholders or affected persons. Now, with reference to my previous slide on section 22, and because of the provisions of section 22.2, it could be used quite effectively by creditors who demand payment. The lawyers in our audience here today will know about the statutory notice set out in section 345 of the Companies Act, the 1973 Companies Act, I mean the previous one. A creditor could, however, simultaneously invoke or threaten to invoke section 22.2 and 3 by reporting such companies to CIPC. So, on our screens, and I seem to have skipped that one, there was also a practice note issued on Practice Note 1 of 2020 by the Commission on 24 March, where Advocate Rory Wallace stated that in the light of COVID-19 and what goes with that the Commission will not invoke its powers under Section 22 in the case of a company that is temporarily insolvent and still carrying on business or trading. It then stated further that it's only applicable to situations where the Commission has reasons to believe that the insolvency is due to the business conditions that were caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that the notice shall lapse within 60 days. So how that determination will be made is unclear, and it may lead to some interesting debates, and it may have some unintended consequences. Because could a company, for instance, argue that they are, because of what are provided in this reprieve, able to dodge a section 345 notice? I think not. And this notice, it should be borne in mind, does not apply to reckless and fraudulent trading, and therefore transparency and honest communication is imperative. So let's conclude. What should you do? Communicate with your creditors in these times if financial distress is being experienced. And despite the contents of Practice Note 1, of 2020. You don't need protection if you act transparently and honestly with your creditors, as it can never be said that you are carrying on recklessly with gross negligence if you do so. In other words, communicate with your stakeholders, i.e. your creditors. So practically, because of the notice to customers by CIPC on 24 March, companies under financial distress can in fact not do as is required of them in terms of section 129.7, and that is to file for business rescue, and because of the DA's non-provisions in that notice. To finally conclude, I think creditors might not be able to issue demand, or at least might be able to issue demands, but will find it impossible to issue summonses at this stage. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Hans. Over to Teresa Kruger from our BDO People and Business Solutions Division.
Thank you very much. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I will be taking you through what employers can do for their employees during this uncertain time, but from a psychological perspective. Firstly, we need to understand that we are dealing with at least three groups. So I'm going to touch on three groups that's got differing needs. Firstly, we're dealing with remote workers, those who are able to work from home. They've got the infrastructure. The essential workers are the frontline staff, and then we've got the critical group, the ones who are not able to work, and this is acknowledged basically as the most difficult of the groups. All right, so while I just wait for the slides, what is important, regardless of the category of the working category that we're dealing with, it is important to understand the needs of your employees. Productivity and engagement stems from a fulfillment of all work needs, whether it's physical needs, emotional needs, psychological needs. All of these are important to engage your employees, to keep them productive. Physical needs deal with the belief that there's no harm, that I'm not going to be attacked in the workplace, for example. Emotional needs is the belief that you can be yourself in the workplace through trust, that openness, and still have that healthy interactions with your co-workers. And the psychological safety is the belief that there's a safe space to be vulnerable, to take some risk in front of other people. Right now, we are dealing a lot with the physical safety needs, and hence obviously the lockdown. So there's already a lot of anxiety that comes from that physical safety concerns. However, it is important for the company that really wants to remain productive during this time that you take care of your employees and psychological needs as well. Change generally happens as a planned intervention in most cases. So companies really have the luxury of time to understand the situation, to come to terms with what they are dealing with. However, COVID is quite different. It's been abrupt, and companies have basically been jolted into a different reality. However, the cycle of change is still very similar in the structure. Employees experience the feeling of anxiety that goes with the change, whether it's internally driven, externally forced. So in terms of the gray area that you can now see on the screen, the cycle of change. Now, there's quite a few models, so an amalgamation of the few, but they basically follow a similar structure. So the gray area indicates what I call the COVID zone for now in this change process. So you are going to find that your employees will likely sway between loss, doubt, discomfort, depending on the situation, depending on the work group that they are in. So these stages are marked generally by feelings and thoughts of anxiety, there's fear, there's confusion. Generally, there's anger, and in this case, there may be anger as well, especially in this lockdown. There's a sense of helplessness and uncertainty. thoughts of job and income loss is likely to be dominant, and anxiety is likely to be elevated, and there's a lot of confusion about what's going to happen. Typical emotions like anger and resentment could still be there. Like in the case, if you do restructure and you do have a plan change where employees may say, you know what, why me? Why am I being targeted? But with COVID, it's different because everybody's in it. COVID has also brought about a different look to this whole change in the organization, and from a psychological perspective. There is more humanity and compassion, and there does seem to be a more general understanding about other people. People can see other people's hardships. So that may have replaced some of the anger and resentment. Depending on the group that we're dealing with, for example, those who don't work, they probably spend more time grappling with a loss, and they may be more prone to states of depression right now, while the remote workers could experience more discomfort as their world of work is now suddenly disrupted. There's kids who need to be taught at home, and so the working hours suddenly is no more as regular as it was. There's more activities, more commitment needed from those employees. But this process is also very fluid at this stage, and depending on the situation, for example, those in the discomfort working from home soon may find themselves in loss as working hours get reduced, as remuneration gets reduced to a sister organization. Importantly, do not expect employees to move through this change cycle or expect them to jump to a more effective phase. That's not going to happen. That's not how the human mind operates. The best thing you can do for your employees is firstly to understand the situation and how it impacts them collectively, but also individually, as everyone does seem to go through it very differently. The recommendations that have been put forward based on this cycle is geared to help transition during this time, and it's a very uncertain time. So it is likely that this is the starting point also to ready the organization for what's coming if you do this correctly. Some of the practical solutions, in the general solutions that I want to focus on that applies to all groups. Firstly, is take a stand. The worst thing you can do in this situation is not say anything, is go into hiding. You need your employees to come back after COVID, to maintain a focus on that shareholder value, the bottom line, the finances, and that is a real concern. And not finding at least that balance between the interaction with the employees is going to be detrimental. Step up the leadership. Understand what is required in the situation. Find the right balance between the transactional things, those things that still need to happen, the activities to drive business, and the transformational factors, the relationships and the connections in this time. Communicate with transparency and clarity, not only to convey the message, but to also build trust and credibility within your organization. Allow platforms for questioning and answering. You can set a time limit. If you have tools available, you can have that two-way communication that a lot of people now lack and in a lot of sense crave. Allow them to field and respond to questions and assist in alleviating a lot of those anxiety and uncertainty. And then perhaps find a common purpose in a community project. This could be food collection for the needy or animal shelter. Psychologically, it deviates the employee's attention from all this anxiety going on, and it keeps the community initiatives going, but it also creates a greater emotional attachment to the organization. For the group that works remotely, and there's quite a few that consulting and business almost as usual, solutions for this group is aimed at enabling them to remain productive during this time. Firstly, create the structure as far as possible and maintain those rituals, those routines that they generally are used to. This could be virtual check-ins in the morning. It could be through virtual thought leadership sessions that you have in your organization. Communicate clear goals and objectives. Now, this is a key cornerstone to keeping employees engaged. Employees still need to understand what is expected of them and what they need to achieve. Allow employees greater flexibility. Now, there's almost a paradox between the structure and this flexibility. So the structure provides the guidelines and the clear objectives to achieve the business results, while the flexibility allows your employees to the time, the space, and how they want to organize that to achieve these goals. Some employees now work best, late at night. Others work best early in the morning. So allow them to use that mental energy optimally to ensure that they remain productive. Ensure that staff have the infrastructure support and connectivity. It's very obvious, but don't assume that they've got that. This will include not only the platforms like the email, but if you have the tools, the Skypes, the Teams that we're currently on, just to create that virtual environment for them. Extend that and allow that infrastructure and platforms to support social interaction between employees as a means to fulfill those emotional needs, especially the younger workforce, the millennials, the Gen Zs. They tend to crave a lot more of that interaction. So if you can use that to have those check-ins, let's say a coffee session, those are the things that would be important to them. Be open and creative with rewards. Don't just let it fall by the wayside. Monetary rewards may now be a bit of an issue, but find maybe things that can work, like flexible time has now become a commodity. So be creative in that aspect. All employees through virtual thought leadership sessions and allow them basically to become part of the solution in the organization. The organization is sitting with ample institutional knowledge and creativity to allow staff to provide this input. And a lot of them are actually craving that. So allow that to happen. Leaders don't know all the answers, and really you don't have to know all the answers. So tap into your workforce because there's a lot of creativity sitting there. If we look at the essential workers, now in the last two groups, this is where a lot of the stress and anxiety and the burnout is going to increase as well. For the frontline employees, the virus poses a greater risk because due to obviously of the exposure. Firstly, ensure to create greater awareness around health and safety protocols and practices and provide employees with the required equipment. Again, don't just assume it is happening. You are going to have to step up those awareness campaigns. The toll of anxiety, stress, burnout, as I said, is likely to be high. So provide these workers with psychological support platforms, whether you have it in-house or if it's externally, that attends to their emotional and psychological safety needs right now. If possible, it would be wise to extend the support to those employees' families, not only to expose, are they exposed to the physical threat, but they're also exposed to that emotional and psychological baggage that these essential workers bring home. So it would be good if you can offer that to those families as well. The non-workers are the tough group. Difficult group, likely already affected by a layoff or condensed work hour or reduced remuneration. So not only have they likely lost that income, but they've also lost that creative outlet, that work, that purpose that they generally have during the day. So it is very important to maintain contact with this group of employees, even though many of them may not have the general connection platforms like an email, like in the construction industry and your manual laborers. But try and set up communication channels that work and that are available, whether it is an email or a personal email, the SMS, a WhatsApp group. It is important that you keep your messages going to these employees. Whether it is what's happening with the business or what likely probably more motivational, don't just leave them by the wayside. Communicate any relief efforts that the company is in the process of applying for, like TERS or the UIF, and communicate that with openness. We don't know the process now. It could take time, but employees need to know that they are not left to their own devices, that the employer is taking care of them. Use the time to upskill employees. With manual labour staff, it is difficult, but where possible, support them and access them online training, softer skills, intrapersonal development, business-related skills. This is a good mechanism to ready them maybe for the world of work post-COVID within that organization, but maybe also assist them with the employability should there be downsizing in future. Another critical skill during this time is the financial planning. So invest in resources to assist your employees to understand their financial situation and plan for future needs. So just to recap and the conclusion, on the business priorities, set those clear goals and expectations. Don't assume that people just go on during the day with their business. Make sure that's realistic and that it's meaningful. Create flexible work patterns for employees to optimize the employee engagement. Create or maintain structure as far as possible through platforms for two-way communication, question and answer sessions. It is important that leaders and managers find that right balance. Don't only focus on the business things, make sure that you also tap into the interactions. So what you do for your employees now during this time will determine what your employees are going to give back when the time comes and COVID is finished. So this will ultimately contribute to your long-term success, the sustainability of your organization. So make sure that you do something about it and that you don't just leave employees to their own devices. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Michiel Jonker now.
Thank you, Teresa. Just to introduce myself, I'm Michiel Jonker, Director and Head of IT Advisory. I'm responsible for the delivery of services in the cybersecurity space as well as IT audits. I just want to see if a page is going to turn to my slide. Ashley, if you can perhaps just see if you can turn it to your from your side. I'm going to continue. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, we have been monitoring the developments in the cyberspace environment. We currently deal with and experience a threat to business operations, as you know, due to the pandemic. Businesses are being forced into sufficiently enable themselves by means of technology to minimize the disruption to their business as usual and to keep the wheels turning. However, it has been noted by us that due to the increased use of technology by businesses, cyber attacks and cyber crime have also increased. If you look at the next picture, I just hope it's going to, there you are. If you look at that picture, it is actually a picture of an interconnected world. As we know, COVID-19 spread because of globalization and because the world is so interconnected. But the same applies to the digital world. We are also interconnected, as you know. The picture shows very clearly. The problem is that we also connect everything possible to the internet these days. And the result is that it exposes us to more and more cyber attacks. And also cyber attacks that exploit the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, we have seen an increase in COVID-related phishing mails, asking people to click on links or attachments that seem to be links that would take you to information about COVID. And we have seen an increase in cyber attacks because of weak remote networking security settings. As you know, many companies have to work now remotely that they didn't do before. And it happens that many users' laptops were not actually configured to securely connect to their company servers in a secure way. So the question is it possible to disengage from the internet in order to avoid these cyber incidents? And the obvious answer is no, we cannot. Most businesses are dependent on the internet to a less or greater extent. So this leaves us with a conundrum. If we cannot disengage from cyberspace, we need to protect us against the cyber attacks. Now, the next slide actually shows a cartoon. There you are. That shows the use of 3 different kinds of controls that we can use in cyberspace. That is a preventive control, a detective control, and the corrective control. The problem is that when it comes to cyber protection, in my opinion, we have over-relied on preventive controls in the past. I want to go so far as to say that we need to design, we actually designed our cybersecurity on the wrong assumption. And that assumption is that we will be always successful with our preventive measures. But what we need to do is we should actually have a paradigm shift in cybersecurity. We should not design our cybersecurity on the basis of success. In other words, where we assume that we will always be successful in preventing incidents. That we should rather design our cybersecurity on the basis of failure. That means that we need to assume that we won't be successful all the time to prevent bad things from happening. That means we accept the fact that we will get hacked, and it will we will have incidents of hacking, and that if it happens, that we should actually focus on corrective controls, corrective measures. For example, if our systems do go down because of an attack, in order to do that, we need to have corrective controls in place. For example, backups in all their different forms, disaster recovery planning, and business continuity planning, which my colleague Sadika will talk about more about in a moment. But it goes without saying that before we can correct, we need to be able to detect security incidents first. Now, it is easy to detect if our systems go down, but if hackers are hiding on your internal network, for example, transferring data to their own servers, it is a different ballgame. The problem is that the average day that a hacker spends on an internal network without any detection is plus minus 200 days. It means that we need to improve our capability to detect in a shorter period of time and then correct it as quickly as possible. Not all incidents result in downtime, of course, but it certainly is the case with cyber attacks where ransomware is used and where ransomware is exploiting the COVID-19 situation right now. Typical controls to enable quick detection of course intrusion detection software, SOCs, in other words, Security Operations Centers, that is monitoring your internal network for attacks on a 24/7 basis using technology like Splunk and so on, as well as automatic analysis of your application and operating system logs that IT can do. And just by the way, BDO decided to provide security awareness training for our clients' employees, and we provide it right now for free. So if you are interested, please make connection with us and we can help you with that. But I want to hand over to my colleague Sadika now. She will touch on the topic how to be resilient with adequate disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning because of the disruption caused by COVID-19 and or when your systems go down because of an attack like ransomware. Sadika, over to you.
Thank you, Michiel. Good morning, all. My colleague has alluded to business continuity management and cybersecurity being of key importance during this time. As COVID-19 emerged at an accelerated pace, extensive gaps are being revealed of organizations, business continuity processes, and the effectiveness of the cybersecurity controls. When we think about business continuity, we need to look at it from a perspective of, are we prepared for a disaster? Can we respond to one? And how would we recover? Based on the current happenings globally, organizations need to move away from the presumption that preventative controls are sufficient to support them when recovering from a disruptive event. A focus needs to be taken from a detection and correction perspective. We currently live in a world where the only constant is change. COVID-19 has certainly emphasized this, and in addition to change, has brought about volatility, uncertainty, and complexity, not only to the way that organizations operate, but also in our day-to-day lives. When we look at business continuity, the standard that guides this is the ISO 22301 Business Continuity Management Standard. Within the standard, it provides you with guidelines on how to develop and implement an effective management system to reduce the impact of disruptive events such as COVID-19. We at BDO, being qualified ISO 22301 lead auditors and implementers, believe that in order to deal with the uncertain times that we live in, we require a focus on early detection and containment of disruptive events, and finally, to effectively correct the situation. With COVID-19 on our shores, we should keep in mind that we cannot prevent each and every disruptive event from occurring. What we need to do is enable ourselves to detect the event, minimize the effects of it, and also to correct post the disruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadiqa. That concludes our presentations for the day. I now invite you to ask your questions of any of the panelists, but we do have one question from Tracy, which came off the back of Hans's presentation earlier. Hans, I'm not sure if you can see the question. I can read it to you. Would the term financial distress as set out in the Companies Act be defined the same for the TERS application? If so, could this then not be an act of insolvency?
Ashley, can people hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I'm having a look at the question, and the term act of insolvency is used in relation to individuals as defined in Section 8 of the Insolvency Act. The Companies Act provides that inability to pay its debts could be, let's call it in inverted commas, an act of insolvency, but it's not strictly that. Yes, it could have these unintended consequences that TERS applications and the like could be seen as an act of insolvency or an inability to pay its debts, but that will have to be proved in a court of law when a liquidation application is brought. And I would suspect that judges would be very lenient in these times and not necessarily fall for the inability to pay its debts argument should a liquidation application be brought against a company as such. So that would be my response to that question.
Thank you, Hans. We have a question from Anonymous who has asked us to please load this recording onto our website, and we will do that. Then moving on to Sonia's question. Hans, I don't know if I should be reading this out to you. Can you see the question?
I can see I'm just scrolling down. It says, can an entity apply for TERS while some, and I seem to, it stops there on my screen. Can you just perhaps read the rest of it, because I can't see it. Oh, sorry, there I see it. While some employees who can work remotely, so you get, say, 50% from the employer, or does the entity have to be 100% shut down for lockdown? If an entity has savings and retained income, can they apply for TERS, or would savings indicate no distress? I would take a rain check on that question and go and research this topic properly and come back to Sonia on a more professional basis, because to give an answer off the cuff on that specific question is possibly uncharted legal grounds, and we need to be very careful. So Sonia, when we can engage offline on this one, and we can research that question thoroughly.
All right, Sonia, may I invite you to please ask your question to our email address website@bdo.co.za. And if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself as Sonia from the webinar, and then I'll make sure that I pass that question directly on to Hans and he can respond to you. Thank you. So our next question, I am interested in the UIF options offered by the Department of Labour. Will you be doing a seminar on it? We can certainly consider it. We will let you know via email if we do a seminar on this particular topic. Then the next question from Anonymous, you mentioned free security awareness training. Michiel, can I invite you to answer this question, please?
Yes. We just make contact with us. I can type my email address in here. We can provide the cybersecurity training for you for free. I will type my email address here now. With regards to your question, if we can consult, yes, we can consult. Many of our services, especially in the cybersecurity space, we can provide remotely. We also have tools where we can log onto your servers or your computers if we need to look at certain settings and so on. If you allow that, we can do that. With regards to your question, if we what advice we can give SMEs for cybersecurity, it depends, of course, on your business, the type of your business. It could be that you have a very small business, but it could be that your data is extremely sensitive. Then it could be a huge company and your data might not be so sensitive. It all depends, and depending on the sensitivity of your data, the sensitivity of your data systems, and how reliant you are on the availability of those systems, we can tailor-made security solutions for you. So I cannot give you a one-size-fits-all answer there, but I would encourage you to engage with me so that we can take it from there. My email address is very easy. It is M for Michiel Jonker, JONKER @bdo.coza. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Michiel. Our next question from All Good is, could businesses call on force majeure as a measure of relief from its creditors? Hans, could you please answer that?
Yeah, I think, Ashley, at this point, I need to give a bit of a disclaimer. This is verbal. To the extent that this is an opinion expressed, it must not be seen as formal advice unless I reduce it to writing at a later stage. So I'm going off the cuff here, but we can always engage online or offline with people at a later stage. I would think the common law position is definitely that businesses could call on force majeure. However, in the retail rental space, many landlords or many contracts have provisions in that contract out of force majeure. There are common law arguments that could be raised as a, for instance, impossibility of performance in terms of an agreement by virtue of a forced lockdown, but it actually becomes a quagmire in a legal context. And there's some old cases going back to the previous century where this issue has been dealt with. But I can add to that I mean, there's the issue of business interruption policies with insurance companies, and without blaming any insurance company on this forum, there is, for instance, a clear block by all insurance companies to claim this COVID for business interruption as a form of force majeure. So this issue, I think, will play itself out in maybe in court cases in time to come, but it is not possible to give a full answer on a forum like this, and one could unpack it later in the form of a written question, and we will respond to it by email as well.
Thank you, Hans. We have a question from Anonymous. Which interactive tools are safe and which are unsafe? I have heard that Zoom is hackable. Michiel or Sadika, could you please answer this?
Yes, Ashley. Yeah, it is true. Zoom, there are quite a lot of news articles right now in the media about Zoom. I even saw this morning that Zoom is getting sued I didn't read the article this morning, but there were cases where hackers hacked Zoom and screened obscene messages at the participants. So I would personally not recommend Zoom right now, although it is a very easy tool to use, especially if your conversation is private and you don't want it to get hacked. I would recommend, as we use for this webinar now, Microsoft Teams. Another more secure tool is Skype for Business. So if you can rather use one of those two, then I think you are in a better secure space to do that. With regards to interactive tools, there are many, and I would again encourage you to rather contact me so that I can get a better understanding what are your needs, and then we can make recommendations based on that discussion.
Thank you, Michiel. We have a question from Sean, which Hans, could I ask you to answer that?
Ashley, again, I think I need to engage with Sean on a one-on-one level on that question. Obviously, off the cuff again, anything is possible by virtue of entering into a formal agreement. Even it does not have to be a lengthy agreement, but one can contract into anything. So I would gladly engage with Sean on a one-on-one basis to deal with and unpack the nature of his question further. So that would be my invitation to Sean.
Thank you, Hans. Okay, a question from Lee. Is it legal to force your employees to take annual leave during COVID-19 lockdown? Teresa?
Yeah, I think that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the labour law experts have not joined me today, but I've had a discussion yesterday with a labour lawyer. So some of the regulations have been relaxed in a way. So forcing employees to take annual leave is one of them. Again, as with Hans said, I think it's better that we maybe answer that question through the actual experts, but from what I understand from a labour lawyer, yes, that is the case. It has been designed or relaxed rather to protect companies in this case and to increase the likelihood of sustainability post-COVID. So my initial answer is yes, but again, maybe some research is more warranted.
Susan, you're welcome to email us if you would need more information on that particular question. Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions pop up in the Q&A. So I'm assuming that everybody has asked what they would like to ask.
Ashley, may I just add something?
Sure.
So we are making available through one of our service partners free pulse surveys for organizations. It's something that you can set up if you are a business owner or even if you have your human capital professionals, that you can take pulse surveys during this time of COVID to help you understand the employees and their needs. Should you want us to assist with those links and help you set up and interpret the data, you are welcome to ask us for that. Again, we are making these services available at no charge at this stage. So yeah, I think I would urge you to try and understand the makeup of your people right now and use this to your advantage.
Thank you, Teresa.
Actually, Hans here, I just want to add something. Somebody WhatsApped me a question as I'm sitting here, asking whether a company could go into business rescue despite the provision of CIPC that there's a DA's non. My proposition would be, if the stress is such that it cannot wait for another 48 hours or a day, one could still file to the CIPC address and argue about it later. because I still believe that the Companies Act is active. So that was just a response to that question.
Thank you, Hans. All right, everybody, thank you very much for participating. That comes to the end of our webinar. If you need more information, we have a host of resources available on our COVID-19 hub on our website. So I've made that address available on the screen for you. We also have a lot of resources that have been published by our global member firms. So you can look at all of that in your own time. And as I said earlier, if you do have a question or something that pops up post the webinar, please email us on website at bdo.co.za and we'll come back to you. So thank you very much for your participation and for listening, and I wish you a great day further. Thank you.